Okay, welcome back to the interview, and today I'm here with Based Mama. Some of you may know her, and we are going to discuss the religion of pieces. And the reason I'm talking to her is because that she is an ex-Muslim. So would you like to introduce yourself and give us a bit of background?
Hi, I'm Based Mama, and I was Muslim from about mid 1995 until 2005. I joined Islam not really knowing much about it, not really having a lot of exposure, only being given the free Quran and pamphlets and things that were handed out at my local mosque. And so I kind of joined because of that and went through various sects of Islam. Of the Sunni side, I've never been a Shia. I worked with the American government counterterrorism with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI to counter cells that were popping up pre and post 9/11 here in the United States, and quickly fell out of love with anything that I really liked about it, because once you're exposed to the deeper doctrine, it's becomes sort of inevitable.
Yeah, yeah. As I've discussed with you before, in Australia recently there was a poll, and 49% of Australians supported the proposition that there be a ban on Muslim immigration. Now, 49% is not a majority, but it should be said that 40% opposed, 49% were for it, and 11% were undecided. So even just allowing for a couple of percent of those undecideds, it's probably fair to say that the majority of Australians would support, if they had to vote either way, on a ban on Muslim immigration. Now, of course, the standard line from the regressives on the left is that, look, we've had successive waves of immigration in Australia, which is true. Post-Second World War, we've had a lot. I think actually Melbourne has the biggest Greek population outside of Athens. We had a huge Greek immigration wave. We've had various waves. We had Vietnamese after the Vietnam War, and that they have generally, after some teething problems, assimilated or integrated quite well. And they have, and that's true. So the idea is that we just need to give Muslims their fair shake and enough time to integrate into Australian society. But as was pointed out in an editorial in the Daily Telegraph, we've had 30 to 35 years of this supposed integration into places like Western Sydney en masse, a lot of Muslims, and it hasn't worked. And of course, hashtag not all, some do, some don't. But there are high levels of distrust of the Islamic community, as borne out by various surveys, which I'll put a link to the video that I did about that. I won't go through them. And so there seems to be a problem with this wave of immigrants that are specifically Islamic. And I wanted to, as part of this conversation, try and get to the bottom of why that might be. And so as someone who is on the inside, obviously not in Australia, but I assume it's pretty much the same, on the inside of Islam, why could you put forth some reasons why it's difficult for Muslims to integrate?
Well, it's not just difficult, it's impossible.
Right.
You're, as a Muslim, you're not allowed to take as friends or confidants anyone who is not also a Muslim. And that means that you have to keep to yourself.
Right.
That's why there will always be Muslim enclaves and neighborhoods and things like that are generally set up around a particular mosque. And those neighborhoods are very insular. There's also the rule that if someone in the community is doing something illegal or sketchy or whatever, you don't rat out another Muslim, because that would be, again, taking as far as the non-believers as a confidant.
And
so you don't do that either.
And just to interrupt there, just 2 days ago, is it now, or 3 days ago in Australia, and I know you've heard this, that two 16-year-old boys were arrested for planning an attack. They had bayonets or something. They were going to go and cut somebody's head off. And the mother of one of the boys knew about this, and of course she said nothing, which is one of these perennial problems. But sorry.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people wonder where the beheading thing comes from, because we had that actually here in the U.S. in Oklahoma City. It was deemed workplace violence, but the guy who did it, he was a Muslim. He did it because of Islam. He was very clear about that. We're actually lucky in that we have so many people who are so bold about declaring why they're doing what they're doing. So that it is kind of in your face.
Yeah.
And there's no denying it. There's no placating it. One of the things that has happened and been happening since the 70s is there's been a lot of Wahhabi infiltration into otherwise moderate mosques. There's the books that you get, they give them for free from the Saudi government. There's a publishing house called Darul Salam.
Yeah.
And they're huge. They're worldwide. They're everywhere. They give a lot of literature out for free. Books, DVDs, CDs of imams speaking. And there's a lot of rhetoric there that you'd miss if you weren't Muslim. Like, you wouldn't know about these people.
Right.
And then you have at various mosques, they'll have a week-long or 2-week-long or even month-long Islamic studies courses.
Right.
And the top students in those courses will get scholarships to go study in Saudi Arabia at the University of Medina or the University of Mecca or the, I think it's Ibn Saud University to study, and they become indoctrinated. They become brainwashed with really hard line, absolute interpretations that they leave no room for anything else. And what most people consider radical Islam isn't radical Islam. It's just fundamental Islam that hasn't been interpreted or made askew in order to fit into the society that they're in. Like, we used to get told at the masjid, the mosque where I used to go, that we lived in a state within a state, and we kept to ourselves, and we had our own laws, because our laws are the laws of Allah, and the man-made laws, the kuffar laws, they didn't matter. And, you know, it was best to avoid interacting with any kind of law enforcement. Like, you didn't report crimes that were done to you by other Muslims. You took that to the imam and you sorted it out, you know, through Sharia rulings or fatwas. You didn't deal with the police at all. You couldn't trust the kuffar, because you're told your whole life, you're told that the kuffar are liars. They're not trustworthy. They're agents of the devil. Secularism is a tool of paganism and is rooted in sin and hedonism, and it's a constant rhetoric. So you build up an animosity on a social level that divides Muslims from the surrounding society.
Yeah, and that's interesting.
But then on a religious level, you have the Quran and the Hadith that tell you can't integrate.
But then they use their justification for some of the reason why, for example, the radicalization of some of the youth here in Australia, is that it's actually the opposite of that Australians don't accept the Muslims. But what you're saying is that from a very early age, they're saying they're embedding in you a deep distrust of not only kuffar, non-believers, but even institutions like the police force, like the law courts.
Because that's the kafir law. That's not the true law. The first thing, like we discussed beforehand, the first thing that people have to stop doing is stop looking at Islam like it's just another religion.
Yep.
It is first and foremost a political ideology. You have to think of it on terms of a pseudo-theocratical dictatorship.
Right.
You have somebody who wants world domination, and it's not just one person. This is the goal of Islam, to make the whole world come into the Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam. And anybody outside of that is in the Dar al-Ab, or Ad, which is the house of war. And you can't have any middle ground, because the religion itself does not allow for middle ground.
Right. And so that's why attempts, I mean, this is the standard line. So, well, Christianity was hard line. We had the Crusades. We had the Inquisition. We had a Reformation. And we removed religion as the legitimacy of society when we separated state and religion. And that this is what needs to happen to Islam. Islam just needs to go through that same Reformation process. But you're saying they're so interlinked that you just can't do that.
Well, yeah, and that's where like I said, what we would consider to be radical Islam, it's not really radical. It's just fully based in the Quran and the Hadith. One of the biggest justifications that they have for overriding or subverting the legal system in a country that is not Islamic is I have to use not Arabic terms. It would be chapter 18, in verse 26. At the end it says, "And Allah makes no one to share in his decisions and his rule,"
right.
Which means that nothing overrides the law of Allah. So you already have a division where you are told as a Muslim that you can't accept any law that isn't
right.
Islamic law.
There's no render unto Caesar, as you've said before.
No, there's no provision for you to live and be obligated to the law within the land. It's actually going against Islam to do that. The only time that you can do that is if you have if you're in a position where you can't be open about what you want to what you want to do, or be open about demanding Sharia. Like I said, we were very plainly told that it's our duty as Muslims, in order to observe the law of Allah, to subvert the state. We were a state within a state. In every Muslim community, you're a state within a state.
Right.
So you already have that division built in.
Yeah, there's this automatic separation, isn't there? That's ingrained.
Yeah. And it has to be, because it's a zero-sum game. Hang on. Lay down. It's a zero-sum game in Islam. You either are or you aren't. And there's just no middle ground. And that's the biggest problem. I think the biggest misconception that people have is that there is space within the religion to be a moderate.
Yeah.
Well, there isn't.
And the evidence is that you can see when someone like Ayana Ali, or maybe even better, Majid Nawaz, who would be considered Muslim reformers, are completely rejected by Muslims, by hardline Muslims,
right?
Completely and utterly, because the Quran goes to some great lengths to talk about how this is without human element in it. It is absolutely perfect, and they talk about how in Arabic it's like melody, the way it goes together. It's so perfect and wonderful. So to even suggest that some of this could be reinterpreted or changed is just completely antithetical to the whole purpose of it.
Well, you can't deny even one verse,
right?
And that's a problem, because if you are a moderate and you want to separate yourself or your beliefs from those violent verses, you really can't. And it's going to be really hard for you to do
Yeah.
because you have, it's going to be hard for you to do because, like I said before, you can open the Quran to any page. It doesn't matter. And there's an exhortation about either doing harm to, causing to submit to Islam, or otherwise bad-mouthing or bashing anybody outside of Islam. There is nowhere you can...
There's no middle ground.
Nowhere you can go.
Yeah, there's no middle ground.
Yeah, and that's...
Yeah, and so that's why, I mean, you're either... Because and there would be plenty of Muslims like this in Australia and the United States who say they're Muslims, but essentially they aren't. I mean, if they're living a secular life where they eat pork and they drink beer and they don't fast and they don't go to mosque, then they're essentially not Muslims.
Yeah, and a true believing Muslim will at least exhort them
Yeah.
to change their ways, to repent, to go back to praying and fasting and all of that. But if they don't, then a true believing Muslim has to declare takbir, which means to declare somebody as outside of Islam.
Right.
And once that's made, or you're accused of being an apostate or whatever, and a non-practicing Muslim, whatever you want to call it, you end up being in the same position as people who are apostates or people who speak against Islam, and you're under threat immediately because there's a default fatwa.
Right.
Due to the Quran and the Hadith, whoever changes his religion, kill him. Fight in the way of Allah against the enemies of Islam. There's just no middle ground. And as they become more and more bold and more open about what they want to do, those moderate Muslims are going to find themselves in a very bad spot very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why Waleed Aly and Majid Nawaz have permanent bodyguards details assigned to them.
Yeah, that's one of the things. If being a moderate Muslim is so easy and so well accepted and things like that, then why do those who even from the inside of Islam criticize, critique, or ask for reformation? Why do they have to have bodyguards?
Yeah.
Why are they afraid for their lives?
Exactly.
If it's totally fine and most Muslims are moderates, why are they afraid?
And it's another way to distinguish, say, a religion from a cult. I mean, that's a cult. You have to imbibe everything or nothing, right? I mean, everything.
That's the distinction that I make between what's religion and what's cult. If you are literally playing with your life by leaving, then that's not a religion. If you leave Christianity, you might upset your family. They might not talk to you. They'll be upset. You'll upset some people. Nobody is going to declare you an apostate and try to come kill you.
Right. And
and in Islam, you have to worry about that. I've had to worry about that even in the United States. I've been threatened.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that at all? Your own personal experience with leaving? Like, is there anything you can...
Yeah. It started... I've been around people who are from, like, the AUE or UAE, I guess, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar. I had friends for a long time that were, Arabs. And I knew a lot of them who, they kind of came to the U.S. and dropped Islam altogether.
Right.
And I had become friends with the son of, I think they're called emirs in Kuwait. And he kind of peripherally knew a guy about the same age from Saudi Arabia. Didn't really like him, didn't really talk to him, was, kind of meh, about him. But he was the son of a Saudi diplomat that worked at the embassy in Washington, D.C. So it's sort of because he was Saudi, nobody would really say anything against him because that's sort of the motherland of Islam. So even if they really hated this guy, they wouldn't say anything against him because he was Saudi, he was training to be an imam, he was,
Right.
they kind of had this respect for him that was compelled from them.
Okay.
It wasn't organic. And of course they didn't tell me that.
Right.
So I became friends with him, and I was about 16 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept trying to pressure me to marry him, and I kept trying to explain to him, like, I can't. You have to be 18.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, what is this? Why? I can marry you if I want to marry you. Like, he really felt like his diplomat status really got him out of
Right.
abiding any law in the U.S. at all. And I knew him, and he was up to shady shit, and his dad was up to shady shit. And I was approached then the first time by the FBI to, kind of gather information. They suspected his father of actually having imported slaves to the U.S. to serve at the embassy and at his residence, and they wanted to know if that was true. So I was like, well, I mean, if I see anything, I'll let you know, because whatever else I am, I'm a fully American first.
Yeah.
Hang on. So I kind of made myself available to hang out with him and to get to know him, and eventually did go to where his father lived. That was sort of it's attached to the embassy compound. It's just sort of their living quarters. And I did see that he had 2 male African slaves, and one of them told me that they had both been bought when they were almost 13. They had been castrated after they were brought to Saudi Arabia, and they were orphans, so there was nobody really to, like, fight for them or anything. And they both had their Achilles tendons cut in their right legs, and they wore pants, so it wasn't like, it wasn't until they were moving around or squatting down to clean something or whatever that I could see it, and it looks very gruesome. It was not done politely, and you can tell just from the damage that's done to them. And so when I went back to my point of contact, I told him, yes, definitely, that there's these 2 guys. They wear ankle monitors. They are very afraid of this dude. I mean, and the guy, well, his name was Ahmed, but so I guess it doesn't, it's a very common name.
Yeah.
Ahmed's father was a short, kind of fat little guy. He wasn't scary, but he apparently was so violent to these slaves that they were terrified of him. He would come in the room and they would look down and literally slump as low as they could to be smaller than him. And these guys were, one of the guys was Dinka. I know that because he was telling me about his people. And he was over 6 feet tall, and he would get on his knees and go around like that so that he would never be above a Muslim, because the slaves were not Muslim. They were Christian. And under the Dar al-Sul, the House of the Truce, a Christian can never be above a Muslim. So if he would walk into the room, this guy would drop to his knees so that he wouldn't be taller than his master.
Right.
And I found that despicable. It was actually really hard to stomach just watching that. Hang on 1 second. I'm sorry, I have a plane going overhead.
Yeah, I can hear. It's not too bad though.
Can't make it be quiet. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I have them here. I have them here as well. I'm kind of in a flight path, but
I'm triangulated by 3 military bases, and everybody around here is like ex-special forces, so they all still work at military bases. But anyway, so after I saw the way that this guy was treating them, it made me ill. And I think that this was about 98. So I had been Muslim for a while, and that was really the first time that I had ever been exposed to Islam on the dirty side.
Right.
I had always been given the sunshine and roses, and Islam loves women, and we treat our women like pearls, and blah, 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 and had never really been exposed to the dark side of things or what was allowed, because it was slavery in Islam in the West is presented like it's something that used to happen, doesn't happen now.
Right.
And I tried to believe that it was because he was from a culture that was very primitive and they didn't really concept of human rights, or I kept trying to rationalize it to myself. I
Right.
spent a lot of time rationalizing this stuff to myself. But after I went to my point of contact, no, I guess it was 1998. Yeah, 98. So I went to my point of contact. I let him know. I informed him. I thought that there would be a big deal made of this, because slavery is highly illegal almost everywhere. Like it's not allowed. And this guy had 2 slaves that he imported. He brought them here.
Yeah.
And the government seemed to already kind of be aware of it. And what ended up happening is they just very quietly sent him back to Saudi Arabia with his slaves.
Right.
So no one was made free.
So, because it's fair, I mean, is it the fact that being a diplomat, I mean, diplomats are really hard to touch, aren't they? I mean, with diplomatic immunity, how do you...
They are in a lot of ways. For felonies, they're not so untouchable. But it was, to me, it felt like a massive betrayal of my government that, I put myself in this position on behalf of my belief as an American that this wrong would be righted and this would be corrected. And all they did was send him back. They just sent him back with his slave. They didn't even, I was so ashamed and so angry that nothing was done for these men.
Yeah.
And they had families, they had, people that were, back home. They just didn't have parents. And under Islam, if you don't have a father or an uncle, somebody to speak for you as a dependent, you're screwed. You have no way out.
Right.
And that's how they got trapped in this position, and nothing was done to help them. So it was a hit. It sent me reeling for a while. And I tried to separate myself from these, I would say like foreign Muslims.
Right.
Because it became apparent that they had a totally different way of viewing things, and Western rules were not going to apply to them. So I tried to start hunting around for a mosque that was mostly American converts or people that were born here or something.
Right.
Maybe they weren't so, God bless it.
Maybe
they weren't so radical,
Yep. Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah, that's not coming through too loud. That's all right.
Okay. There's really nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So you were still kind of you're still sort of half in it, saying, no, it's actually good. I'm just around the wrong people. It's these foreigners that are still stuck in the Middle Ages, but there is a happy, sunny, sort of more reformed Islam, and I want to try and stick with that if I can.
Well, they would say all the time that, Islam is the perfect religion. Muslims are not perfect people. Just like you have, different sized fingers on your hand, there are going to be different Muslims. Some will be good, some will be bad. And there's a lot of rationalization going on.
It's a really bad analogy, though, isn't it? Fingers and people.
It truly is. But you kind of realize they're all attached to the same hand.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I had only ever read the Quran in English at this point.
Right.
And so it was the Pickthall translation. So it was very flowery and poetic, and the violence was really downplayed. It was really, really presented as only something you did if people were aggressive to you as a Muslim because you were a Muslim, and self-defense acceptable, right? So, okay. And I moved to a different mosque, and I was told, you have to learn Arabic. You have to read the Quran in Arabic, or you're never really going to understand it.
Right.
So I learned to read and write in Arabic, and by this time I had already met and married my husband, my first husband, who is from Egypt. And they're like Hanafi or Maliki. They're the more liberal type of Muslim. That's by no means to say that they are moderate
Right.
or prepared to integrate at all.
Mm.
They're just less. They have more flexible rules about things like hijab, and it's more they're more into blending into your surrounding environment in an external way.
Right.
Not really, you still don't eat pork or drink or anything like that, and you still pray 5 times a day, but you don't look the part. Basically, you're not wearing the big thobe, and women aren't really pressed to wear hijab, and
Right.
it's a little more relaxed,
Yeah.
I guess, on the outside.
Mm.
And I thought that he was more moderate, so I was kind of duped there too. But things were okay for a while until I really got a good grasp of the language.
Right.
And could read for myself. And I picked up this book, and I tell people, if you're interested in knowing how Islam works on a day-to-day basis, it's called Reliance of the Traveler.
Okay.
Pick it up. Make a study of it.
Maybe I'll link to that. Is that easy to get on Amazon?
Yeah, actually, I believe it's a free PDF. You can download it.
I'll link to. Yeah.
I mean, if you prefer, paper book, yeah, but it's widely available because it's part of dawah to propagate and give out the information. But it's sort of a quick and dirty rundown, as big a book as it is, of what Sharia law is. And I studied that, and I studied fiqh, which is Islamic jurisprudence, understanding how fatwas are made, how they're divined, why there's different interpretations of different things. And I was like, oh, okay, I was trying to understand it while reading the Quran,
right.
while studying the Hadith, and it was too violent. It was always unsettling to me that there was this massive propensity of violence towards people who weren't Muslim. Because there is no individual in Islam.
Yeah.
You are part of the Ummah first. Your first loyalty is to Islam. Before you're male or female, before you're American, Australian, British, whatever, you're a Muslim first.
Yeah.
And if you happen to be patriotic to your country, that's kind of hard for you to do, because it means you have to have two masters.
Yeah. So you can be patriotic to the extent that your patriotism agrees with Islam, but if it doesn't, it's to be discarded.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way of the kuffar. Anything that's of the kafir it has to be rejected, because it would be considered mimicking their way or lifestyle or mannerism or way of speech. I mean, everything has to be. It's so regimented that even the way you speak,
right,
is regimented. So when you have mass immigration, or even scheduled immigration, where you say, like, every year we're going to take in 10,000 people from Bahrain or something, you're going to have a lot of problems. Not that you would have 10,000 immigrants from Bahrain at one time, but let's just say for that, we'll have 10,000 immigrants from Bahrain. Well, they have no less than 10 Quranic verses that say that they can't be part of your society.
Right.
And then there is quite a bit of hadith and the seerah, that's the life of Muhammad, the biography of Muhammad, that tells you can't. So you can't be loyal to anything but Islam.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, maybe that can lead on to another part of this. This was another sort of part of the standard sort of leftist idea, the relativist idea, is that, well, look, we understand that there are extremists, but what we do is we vet them. We vet them before they come overseas. We give them character tests. We try and exclude out the radicals, or those who are prone to radicalization. But you run into this problem of what the Quran exhorts followers to do, which is, it's perfectly fine to lie. There's also the problem that a lot of refugees, of course, don't have paper trails and can't really be vetted on that level anyway. But can you speak to the idea that the Quran exhorts followers to lie to the kuffar? It's completely reasonable, and why sort of vetting Muslim immigrants is difficult?
Yeah. You have a hadith where Muhammad states that jihad is deceit.
Mm-hmm.
A big misconception that people have about jihad is that it's only limited to warfare. This is not true. Jihad is a many-pronged weapon or many-pronged war strategy. You can advance jihad through dawah, going to other countries and spreading Islam through preaching, or through war, or through deception. Anything is okay as long as it advances the cause of Islam. There is no means that isn't justified by the end.
Right.
And that's, again, it's a difficult concept for people in the West, having Enlightenment values, having this concept of, free and open exchange and things like that, to run into people who know better that they can lie to you and you can't do anything. You can lie to other Muslims to smooth out differences, or if people are fighting, and so they're really big on the white lies. One of the things that's become really popular is to call all deception by Muslims taqiyya, but taqiyya that's a misnomer.
Right.
Taqiyya is very, very specific to the Shia.
Right.
And if you're going to discuss or debate with a Muslim and you say taqiyya and that Muslim is not a Shia, they're going to shut that conversation down, and they'll tell you don't know what you're talking about because you don't.
Right.
You kind of do, but you don't. It's like a little bit of education is the dangerous thing. I can give you the verses if that helps.
Oh yeah, go for it. Rattle it off.
In the 3rd chapter, and the 28th verse, it tells Muslims to, guard themselves against any danger where they are not in the majority.
Right.
So that means you have to avoid being friendly or making friends with kuffar, because there are, if the country that you're in is not friendly to Muslims, you have to find a way to get along, right? So in the same verse that I quoted to you before, where, take no Christians or Jews for friends or confidants, except to deceive them. You can even deny your faith if you want to.
Right.
And that's fine. Quran, Surah or chapter 40, verse 28. You can hide. You're told that you can hide your faith from non-believers. So you can say that, I'm not really religious, or I'm not really a Muslim, or whatever.
Right.
Okay. But then you can also say you're compelled to lie, really. I mean, that's really what it is. Hang on.
Yeah, I can hear that
I'm
plane.
sorry, freaking planes are killing me.
Yeah, it doesn't come through that loud, actually. It's not too bad.
Okay. It's just, I'm inside. There's nothing else I can do. I don't know why it's like all of a sudden really loud. Must be like a popular day to, it's Friday because it's a popular day to fly. Is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have Quran, Surah 9, or chapter 9, verse 3, that says, Allah and his messenger are free from liability to the idolaters.
Right.
And that tells you that you have no obligation to those outside of the faith. So you have all of these reasons why you don't ever have to be truthful. And that's just from the Quran. And then there's hadith and seerah that back that up.
Right. Right.
With the one that I gave you before, the Jihad is Deceit, if you want to look that up.
Yep.
That's Sahih al-Bukhari 52,
Okay.
269. So I know there's going to be people that want to argue, so
Really?
I'm giving references.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm used to it. I get threatened and trashed and harassed all the time. So
Yeah.
I always come with references.
Well, that's I mean, that's why we're having you on, because who's we? Me. That's why I'm having you on, because you know this stuff. Yeah. So I mean, so it's not just Quranic. It's backed up by the surah, by the hadith. It's all self-reinforcing. But Mike,
Sirah.
Sorry.
Surah is a chapter of the Quran. Sirah is the biography of Muhammad.
Yeah. Once again, that's why you're on, and I'm not talking by myself, sounding like an idiot. So I was going to say though, so this understanding that you got was only really after going to the Arabic and really getting in depth with it. Is that right?
Yeah. Because once you can read it in its plain format, the ability to rationalize or deny things, it goes away.
Okay.
It is what it is. It's unfiltered. And that's the thing that really kind of drove me out of it.
So here's the question though.
Go ahead.
So, I'm trying to sort of understand more about the Islamic community. So then you've done that, but what about, which the majority of the Muslim world doesn't speak Arabic as their first language, at least, and even though they can recite maybe Arabic Quranic phrases, it doesn't mean that they actually understand them. And so the question is, inside a mosque, they're not getting that very literal Arabic translation. They're getting a flowery version of it. A lot of Muslims.
In the more moderate mosques, they are.
Yeah. And so
that's what I was saying about the Saudi infiltration. With that Saudi money, they train these guys in their universities and send them back.
Right.
That's why I mentioned Faiz Muhammad. You guys have him there.
Yeah.
In Sydney, he was people would call him one of the most radical imams. He wasn't at all radical. He just presented the information as unfiltered as he could. He's not he wasn't radical. I think he's kind of dropped off the map now, but he wasn't radical. He just gave you what Islam was without the interpretation. The problem that you have with Muslims who don't speak Arabic or who don't understand Arabic, they have to get their information from their imam.
Right.
So they have to appeal to scholars because even if you can read in Arabic, you still have to appeal to scholars.
Right.
So everything ends up in the hands of Muslim clerics anyway. So you cannot downplay their position in Islamic life at all. They are the go-to people for Muslims and for the kuffar to understand what Islam is about. A nice little trick that I'm sure has already been played in Australia, because it gets played here and it gets played in the UK as well often, is that they'll host an imam or a speaker and they'll, quote, rent out the space to another organization.
Yep.
And that is their way of having plausible deniability. They'll have that same person there 4, 5, 6 times, so they clearly are okay with it, but they'll always guard themselves with plausible deniability and say, oh, well, we didn't host this person.
Right.
We rented out our facility.
Right.
And that's a very good dodge and a good way of using your law against you. And it's very popular. It's well known and exploited very, very well.
Yeah.
All over the West.
Well, I think that there's another aspect to this so because, as you said, that who was it? The guy that's here in Australia?
Faiz Muhammad.
Okay, so, and you said that he gave, he wasn't radical. He just gave the literal interpretation of what it actually says. I mean, he knows it, and he didn't disguise it in all the flowery interpretive way. And this is sort of an internal contradiction, because we have I've heard this argument before, and I've heard it from a prominent Muslim here in Australia, and his name's Waleed Aly. He's on TV. He's like the face of it's the leftist face of Muslim that they'd like everybody to agree with. Now, he's an intelligent guy, there's no doubt about that, but he's fond of saying that, well, the Islamic faith, there's no central body, there's no central authority, so what this means here is different from what it means over there. And so basically what he's saying is you can interpret it any way you'd like and fit it into your life, which sounds all well and lovely, but if it can mean anything, then it means nothing. That's the first problem. But it also seems to go against the Islamic faith itself, which says this is the unalterable word of God, which has not been touched by humans, and you can't touch it. You can't reinterpret it. So that seems to be contradictory. The idea that you can interpret it, like, for example, you can interpret it in a peaceful way. You can't really. Isn't it contradictory to say that you can interpret it this way when fundamentally they say you're not allowed to interpret it?
Yes, because it's, again, I hate to say it, but when it comes to clerics and scholars who relate ideas to the West, I wouldn't believe a thing that they ever said. Unless you can yourself go find it in the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sirah yourself, I wouldn't believe anything they say, because that is a direct violation of Islam. If you reinterpret the religion to fit your particular lifestyle, you've already stepped outside the bounds. You're already an apostate.
Yeah. There's actually...
you've already denied Islam. So it's...
Yeah. Well, there's actually... So that guy I mentioned to you, Waleed Aly, he's on TV in Australia and everybody thinks is wonderful. Now, he was on a TV show in Australia back in about 2009, 10, I think. May even be earlier than that, with Christopher Hitchens in Australia. And Christopher Hitchens just kept holding him to his feet to the fire and saying, yeah, but how are homosexuals dealt with in the Muslim faith? And he kept trying to dodge it. And Christopher Hitchens kept saying, you're dodging the question. And he finally got him to admit at the end of this little exchange what Islam says about homosexuality. I mean, he had to say it. And it's up there on YouTube. People can just go search it. I might link it if I can remember. But yeah, it's very interesting that when actually held down, no, what does it actually say? You just can't get out of it. You can't reinterpret your way out of it.
And that's kind of the point. That's you're allowed to lie. Like I said, there's four circumstances for lying to unbelievers. There's like I said, taqiyya, which is saying something that's not true about your Muslim identity. And then there's kitman, which is lying by omission, which is what this guy was trying to do.
Yep.
And a lot of Muslim apologists do this.
Yep.
Like we were talking about the verse, it's Surah 5, verse 32. If anyone kills one man, it is as if he has killed all of mankind. Yeah. Which is actually just a plagiarism from the Torah.
Yeah, the Cain and Abel story.
But then they, and then they kind of skip over the rest of it. Yeah. And pretend like it wasn't there, because the rest of it is, and indeed there came to them our messengers with clear proofs, evidences, and signs. Even then, after that, many of them continued to exceed the limits by oppressing unjustly those things set forth by Allah in the land. And the recompense to those who wage war against Allah and his messenger and do mischief in the land is only that they shall be killed or crucified, or their hands and feet be cut off on the opposite sides, or be exiled from the land.
So it's completely contradictory.
I mean, so
And that's that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that goes on in the Quran, actually.
Yeah, that.
But there's a lot of that kind of cherry picking.
Yeah,
That's the kitman.
but it's
like lying by omission.
And it's cherry picking. It's worse than cherry picking, because that phrase, which both Obama and I think George Bush before him, George Bush II, actually repeated out loud, when they try to say, oh, Islam's a great religion and it's peaceful and all the rest of it. And Obama continues to say how it's perverted by ISIS when ISIS just takes a literal reading of it.
Well, it's perverted by the next verse.
Yeah, it's a plagiarism from the Torah, but it's got it wrong, because that's in the context of the Cain and Abel story, and that God sort of says something about you've killed his bloods, which means Abel's potential descendants. Now that you've killed him, he can't have any descendants, right? He can't have any children.
Right, you've killed his bloodline.
Yeah, you've killed his bloodline off, and that's what it means. Like, you've killed his bloodline off. But then, as you've said, like, this story comes to Muhammad originally through some exiled Jewish scholar in the 6th century, probably, who's hammered, telling him a story secondhand, and this is how it gets in the Quran. I'm not saying it's deliberately misrepresented in the Quran, but I'm saying it's not even taken from the Torah correctly, and then it's cherry picked. So it's a false interpretation to begin with, and then it's cherry picked out of context.
Yes. Well, the reason that's important to outline how Muslims are allowed to lie is because this rule goes across all sects.
Right.
There is no Muslim that this doesn't apply to you, and you, as a non-Muslim, need to be aware of it whenever you're dealing with Muslim. You're basically dealing with, it's almost like trying to deal with spies. You never know who is the spy and who isn't, right? So you have the taqiyya, which is lying about your identity as a Muslim. Then you have the kitman, which is just leaving the things out that you don't really want people to know. But then you have tawriya, which is intentionally making people believe something that isn't true, which would be saying things like, "Oh no, Aisha wasn't 6 when she was married and 9 when she had sex with Muhammad. She was 18. They used a different calendar."
Right.
And they'll blow it off. That's tawriya.
Yep.
You're allowed to do that, all for the sake of Islam. Then you have muruna, which is the Egyptian way that I was talking about, where you sort of blend in by setting aside some practices, those outer things in order to advance Islam.
Right.
So it makes, because it's so rigid and because it's an all or nothing, and you have all these provisions where you don't want to blend in, and then if you are forced by circumstance to blend in, you have all of these ways that you can lie and deceive, and so you never really are blended in. And that's a problem, because everybody will say the same thing. Well, all the Muslims I know are so nice.
Yeah.
They're so nice. They're moderate.
Of course
they're whatever. I'm going to tell you, I lived in a Salafi community. I was a moderate Muslim. We heard stuff like, if you had a terrorist attack, it was, well, the West shouldn't be over there doing what they're doing, and then you wouldn't have these problems because they wouldn't have to fight back. It was all about, they were defending themselves,
Of course.
And even though it was a clear attack on someone else, that was the way you spun it, because it was, this is the cry of frustrated people, rioting and bombing things and blowing things up. This is just the cry of frustrated people, because no one has listened to them.
Yeah. And the liberal left has swallowed it hook, line, and sinker for years.
Oh, they absolutely have, because they're banking on that white guilt and that Western guilt, and that, we've been so blessed, basically through our own ingenuity and the ingenuity of our ancestors, is why we're doing as well as we have. Their failure to do as well is not the fault of the West.
No.
And they have this foot in the door where they can tell you that it is.
Yep.
That, because we have this ingrained idea that we've been being sold since what, the 50s, 60s, that if you have something, it's because it was taken from someone else. And we keep having this rolling around in our head. And this is something that, I mean, I lied all the time as a Muslim.
Right.
I didn't care. It was just a stupid kuffar, you know. I didn't care about him or her or anybody else. I was polite and genial, and I told lies, and I said that, you know, Muslims didn't believe things that I knew that they believed that were upsetting to other people. Like they would say, well, what about cutting off the hands and feet
Yeah.
of thieves? Oh, nobody does that anymore. They just, you know, that's like old stuff, like from the Torah. Muslims never really did that. That came from the Jews. So, because Jew blame is always like a constant
Oh yeah, they're big on that.
theme.
Mm.
Yes. So it was a lot of like, oh no, we didn't, you know, we didn't do that. And Muslims never did that. And you're lying so much of the time that you, after a while, you'll start to believe your own lies. And you'll start to try to convince yourself that, you know, underneath it all, Islam really is really peaceful. It's just people don't understand and they misinterpret, and you'll blame stuff like not being able to read and write in Arabic, not being able to understand Arabic. So when you see, you know, a YouTube video of some black dude cutting off another black dude's hand and you go, well, that's not Islam. It's because they can't read the text. So they don't understand it. Failing to understand that the imam who ordered that punishment went to a university, probably in Saudi Arabia, learned to read, write, and speak Arabic, and has a full understanding of Quran and Hadith.
It's actually the opposite of what they claim. It's precisely because they do understand it that's going on. So just back to that point about... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say back to the point about Aisha and about how the Quran is immutable. It's the word of God. It's untouched by human hands. It's perfect and all of this. This is the contradiction you have, because if it is perfect, then it transcends time, right? It's for all ages. And so, and Muhammad, and so that, you know, if you really want to stand by the Quran, you have to stand behind the idea that marrying at 6 and having sex at 9 is okay. I mean, how do you get around that? Because if this is the perfect word of God, Muhammad's life is something to be emulated. How do you get around? What is the justification besides the lying about the dates, which is easy to disprove because it's in numerous places her age is confirmed? But how do they spin that one?
Oh, they'll say that, yeah, well, she was illiterate and uneducated. She really didn't know how old she was. And again, they'll go back to that it was, you know, they used a different calendar, so, you know, it was off by a few years. And you know, if you start to question things and you hear these lies and you start to look at them and you do the math and it doesn't add up. The oldest she would have been, you know, if she was 9, they were still on the lunar calendar or some other, you know, calendar that of the time and of the place, then that would have made her 11, maybe, you know, which is not that much older. And your father can actually sign the nikah, the marriage contract for you at any time.
Yeah.
There are girls that have been betrothed before they were even born.
Right. Because I've heard defenses.
As soon as you find out you're having a girl.
Yeah, because I've heard defenses of, you know, well, it was a different time, it is fine to say, look, in the 15th century we did this, in the 6th century we did that. That's a perfectly fine defense. But if you know, well, there were different standards in the 6th or 7th century. Okay, fair enough, there were different standards, but it doesn't get you out of the fact that this is the perfect word of God, unchangeable. Well, he doesn't say go out and bang 9-year-olds, right? But Muhammad's life is held up as for you to emulate, right? And so...
Yeah, to live perfectly in Islam would be to emulate Muhammad in every way.
So...
And for women, it would be to emulate Aisha, even though she was really a very special case. In Islam. She was the preferred wife. So she got away with a lot of stuff that none of his other wives were allowed to do,
Right.
but he beat her too. I mean, it wasn't you're allowed to hit your wife.
Yeah, well,
So
that's an interesting
like, who
point,
cares?
because I learnt last night. Now you will know this one as well, that the Pictol interpretation. Now you know the part about beating your wife. It says, I think you are able to beat your wife lightly, and I hear this all the time from Muslims. Oh, it just says beat them lightly, like with a feather or something. But it doesn't say that in the Arabic version. There's no beat your wife lightly in
Mm-mm.
the Arabic version. It's just beat
No.
your wife.
Uh, it says you can beat your wife.
Yeah.
That's what is it? 434, I think.
Hmm.
Um, uh, you are allowed to beat your wife.
Yeah.
The hadith that they go to back that up is they went to Muhammad and asked him, with what should we hit our wives with, and he's standing there brushing his teeth with a miswak or siwak, a miswak stick, which was common to use to clean your teeth, and beat her with this. So if you go and Google miswak right now, you're going to see a little box of short, stubby sticks with frayed ends. That is not what a miswak is. A miswak is a branch from the arak tree, and it's more like a willow switch.
Okay.
So you're not talking about a little toothbrush. I'm going to smack her a little bit on the shoulder with this, and I'll just to let her know that I am displeased. That is not what happened. It is the the other Quran verse that talks about it says, "Take in your hand a green branch and beat her with it, and do not break your oath." So it's very clear that they're not talking about a tiny little toothbrush. They are talking about a flexible green branch from a tree.
Well, and
a switch.
it just seems ridiculous anyway. I mean, if it was a tiny little toothbrush, then it would be completely ineffectual anyway, and so what's the point of it? I mean, she would not be worried about doing anything wrong and getting beaten by a toothbrush that doesn't hurt. What would be the point of that? You might as well just say...
Exactly.
Yeah.
They make it out like it's a symbolic gesture of your displeasure with your wife. But she doesn't even have to actually have done anything. You just have to suspect her of doing something or think that she might get out of line. And because it's if you fear disobedience from them, so if they're maybe, talking to your other wives and you getting quiet when you come around or something,
Yep.
then, well, she might be being disobedient, so you're going to have to beat her. And I've seen that happen a lot, actually.
Right.
Woman hasn't done anything wrong, and she will get absolutely plastered against the wall or to the floor or whatever, and he will just wail on her because he suspects that she might be disobedient to him. No proof.
No
He
proof.
just suspects it.
Yep.
Well, you don't need proof. If your husband accuses you of something, you can be beheaded without proof.
Right.
You are very much at the mercy of your husband. All he has to do is accuse you of disobedience, repeated disobedience, and you can be stoned to death, you can be lashed, or you can be beheaded.
Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? It sounds very familiar, the way feminists, not the beheading part, but the way feminists are now pushing the listen and believe line when it comes to sexual assault cases, that the accusation is the evidence. That's how they would like it to be played. And they seem to be getting a lot of...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When it comes to fathers and husbands in Islam, yeah, it is. The accusation is enough to presume guilt. It's sort of, I try to explain it to people. It's the inverse of our society.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in our society, men are fairly disposable. We don't really consider their rights and needs and desires, and we often override their rights in favor of the rights of women. This is part of Islamic law. The woman is it's in the Quran. She is mentally deficient because she's a woman. She's inherently dirty because she at some point in her life will begin menstruation. So you can't touch a woman. That's not allowed for you, because all women who are not allowed, like not related, your sister, your mother, certain aunts, cousins you can marry, so they are not allowed to you. you can't shake hands. That's why we had a scuffle. I believe it was in Sweden, I'm not sure, where
Hmm.
a Muslim guy would not shake the
That's right.
hand of
Yep.
a woman, and she got in trouble for it.
Yeah, that's
um,
unbelievable.
it's our values completely turned inside out and back around. It's really, really weird.
So back on this, I I forgot to sort of add this in on trying to reform the religion. Is the Ayan Ursi Ali sort of distinction she makes between sort of the good part of the Islamic faith, say the Mecca period, as opposed to the Medina, where it gets violent. And now, maybe I did bring this up, but is this a viable attempt to reform it? And if not, why not?
You I don't think it will work. I mean, it could work for some time. You can always reform people's minds. But because this is a zero-sum game in Islam, you're either fully Muslim or you're not, or you'll always be under threat. You can't win. So you'll have periods where things will become more liberal,
Mm.
um, but they will always cycle back because this is not the true faith. It's not the true religion. That's why we saw a lot of, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, we began to see a lot of liberalism in traditionally Islamic countries. And all the way up until, the mid 60s and 70s, the Muslim Brotherhood was active in Egypt in the 50s.
Yeah.
And they spread throughout everywhere they could. I mean, they were, getting people more and more radicalized, more and more fundamentalist. And they decried the hedonism of the Ottoman Empire because they allowed non-Muslims to have alcohol and to eat pork, and they allowed them to have a bigger house than a Muslim and things like that. And so they felt that that was a betrayal of Islam, and they wanted the pure and unfiltered Islam to come back. And that's when you started to have, in the 60s and 70s, Islamic revolutions,
Mm. Yeah.
because there is always going to be a time limit on that liberalism
Mm.
because there's no support for it in the religion.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
So if you identify as a Muslim, if you're going to be a liberal Muslim, you're on a limited time limit.
well, that's the tragedy of Iran, isn't it? I mean, pre-revolution, I mean, they were, attempting to become a liberal society. The Shah wanted that, wanted democracy, wanted, liberalism, basically. But the forces of the religion took over.
Right. And it will, because it's too rigid. It's too rigid a belief system. It's too rigid a system of law, because that's what people have to really stop thinking that's just another religion.
Yeah.
It's the only way I really could describe it is it would be like if Stalin had a religion, and that was going to be his justification for all the stuff he did, is just to call I'm going to call communism a religion. That's what it's going to be now.
Yep.
And it's a rigid political ideology before it is anything else.
Yeah.
And it has to be self-perpetuating, which means that you either have to be on the inside or you're on the outside, in order to propagate itself.
So
that's the reason that. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say. So that's the reason why this Medina Mecca distinction doesn't really matter, because both of them are still political ideologies first, even though one's peaceful and the other isn't.
Right. Because he was really only, I mean, if you look at the history of Islam, he was only really peaceful when he had to be, when he was under threat. That's why you're always, allowed to deceive when you're the odd man out as a Muslim. You're always allowed to deceive people that are not Muslim in order to advance the cause. Like I said, you live as a state within a state until you can take over.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And so it's Muslim men can marry non-Muslim women, but a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man, because it's an inversion of what it was before. The Arabian Peninsula prior to Islam was a matrilineal society. So in order to take over, because they didn't really have standing armies, they really weren't very warring. They're mostly tradesmen. So in order for him to become a really effective warlord, what he had to do was give men of that time and place what they would have desired most, which would be as many women as you can gather. You can marry 4 of them, but there is no limit on how many sex slaves you can have. And you can take them as war booty. Any man you kill, you can take his stuff, and so he was compelling men to find a reason to fight. And by limiting women and saying you can't marry a man who's not a Muslim, that secures all of the children that woman will produce as being also Muslim, which means you're making fighters.
Yep.
Actually, that guy that I was talking about, Faiz Muhammad, he gives you the outline of the parenting, the Islamic view of parenting. People say, oh, no, everybody loves their kids. Everybody wants the best for their kids. He said, we want to have children to offer them as soldiers defending Islam, okay? That's the Islamic view of parenting. So every child that you have, men are so divorced from loving fatherhood that it's disgusting, to be honest. There's a hadith where a man marries a woman that he believes to be a virgin, but he finds out that she's pregnant, right? So he goes to the prophet and he goes, well, what can I do with her? And he's like, well, she's lawful for you. You can have sex with her. After she has the child, beat her, and that child will be your slave.
Right.
So whereas before, remember that just before Islam, the woman could become pregnant, have 3 or 4 husbands, and decide which husband she wanted to father that child. And it was usually based on like how many children he was already responsible for, because they were tradesmen, So really it was more traditional gender roles. It was just that the family was known by the woman as opposed to the husband. So it was matrilineal. But think about the huge shift in society that had happened at such a time when you marry a woman, and before that, every child would have been known by her family name and by her family's standard, to now you marry her, you find out, she's pregnant with somebody else's kid, and you beat her, and that child is a slave.
Right. It's a huge shift. Yeah, massive. So just on that sort of going back to how Muhammad rallied the troops, so to speak, how he got people on board. This goes back to really understanding the word jihad, and let me give you my very novice understanding of it. That jihad loosely means struggle, and so that's why you get a lot of Muslims saying things like, "Oh, it's internal struggle." Your internal struggle to come to Allah, right? But in the Quran, the parts that I've read and I'm aware of is that it means to strive in the way of Allah, and the Quran is reasonably clear on what this means, and that's jihad warfare, which is to, as you had said before, to extend the boundaries of the Islamic world, the Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam, at the expense, specifically at the expense of the non-Muslim world, the Dar al-Harb, the house of warfare, right? So this is the clear invocation of what jihad means. It's forever expanding the boundaries of the house of Islam at the expense of the non-Muslim world. And then later on it talks about, when waging jihad, it talks about using your person and your belongings. So it really sort of contradicts this idea that jihad is some internal struggle, that it's just some spiritual struggle. I mean, that's a nice sounding way to make it sound peaceful, but the Quran kind of, when you know some of the verses, I only know some of them, but it seems to completely contradict that idea that jihad is really a violent struggle.
They'll tell you that all the time, and that's actually based on a very, very weak hadith. That it's the greatest jihad is the inner jihad. Like, yeah, it's bullshit. The Quran, everybody has to engage in jihad, and jihad, it means a holy war, a holy struggle. So this is something that is an incumbent duty upon every Muslim. It's, there are various ways that you can exact jihad, like pushing for laws to be changed to accommodate Islam. There's, I wouldn't say an interpretation, but a sort of understanding that you can fabricate instances of Islamophobia. You can basically instigate people into saying something, and then you accuse them. It's sort of social justice 101. You get violent, but then you say that they got violent and it wasn't you.
Right.
It's yeah, it's that the person, it's in the hadith, what kind of jihad is the best, and Muhammad says the person who was killed while spilling the last of his blood. So and that is a very strongly held hadith. That is a very trustworthy hadith. So that, he tells you right there, to die in jihad is the best way. That's jihad. There's all kinds of where how should I die in jihad? You should die cutting a horse out from underneath of the enemy. It's
so
it's really,
and this is where you get suicide bombing. Community is a specifically Islam one, and this is where they can get the justification for it.
Oh yeah, it's all over. It's in the Quran a lot, but it's also a lot in the Hadith, because you're talking about Muhammad, his life, and the way that he did things. So you can. I keep telling people I would go to the source. Go look to islamweb.net or go to islamqa.com, and you can just subject search this stuff. You'll be looking for fatwas, which are Islamic rulings about things. You can. It's so unmasked, and again, because they're becoming so bold and honest about what's going on, it makes it so easy for you to understand. You have jihad in a violent way. You have jihad in deceit. You have jihad in dawah. You have jihad in making complaints against people, or trying to shift society and gain sympathy. These are all manifestations of the same thing. They're just fought on different fronts. And I think that's why people don't see it coming.
Well, I think if there's one positive out of all of this of the last sort of 20 years of increasing Muslim extremism around the world, is that I think the average person, average non-Muslim in the Western world, besides the people who continually lie to themselves and tell themselves that it's all okay, is that the average person knows a lot more about Islam today than they did 10 or 15 years ago. And it's precisely because, as you said, they're more bold, and it's actually easy to find out these things and see through the lies because it's so black and white.
They're not even trying to hide it anymore.
Yeah. But that somehow the liberal left still seems, and Obama said that again the other day. He said that Islam has been perverted by ISIS. But it seems to me that moderate, it's the exact opposite. It's moderate Muslims who are perverting Islam.
Perverting it means actually reading it.
Yeah. There's nothing that ISIS does. I think Sam Harris has made this point, that there's nothing that ISIS does that you can't just get straight from the Quran. There's no misinterpretation here. It's just you just read it straight off.
Well, exactly. That's why, every beheading, crucifixion, torture video that they do, they spend the first 10, 15, even 20 minutes giving you Quran and Hadith and how they're allowed to do this, and then they kill the guy or girl. They are very, very well backed by their religion. And the problem with Islam is to try to say that it can be placated or that it can be made peaceful. That in itself is a misinterpretation of the religion.
Yeah, exactly.
to try to focus on those, those slivers of verses from the Meccan period.
Yeah.
Is it's not the like the hadith that the holy war is the the inner struggle.
Mm.
Most scholars agree that it was a fabricated hadith, but how many times have you heard it?
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's the one. That's what you
If you want
hear.
the straight dope,
Yeah, that's the one you hear
yeah,
the
if you want the
most.
straight dope, go to Bukhari.
Right.
That's the most trusted hadith. After that, it's Al Muslim. After that, Abu Dawud. And because there are levels of trustworthiness as they have been reviewed many, many times, but that's going to give you the clearest interpretation of everything. The Sahih al-Bukhari, because they'll do the same thing with the the lying. Is they'll cite a hadith that is at most questionable, if not completely pulled out of thin air, and because it sounds nice and pretty, they'll give that to you. And what do you know?
Exactly.
You don't study
Yeah,
Islam. You're not going to
you
catch
don't know
on.
which ones are the most cited and yeah.
Yeah, it's like I want to say, I don't really want to say how much I lied,
Right.
but I lied a lot about just about everything because you're allowed to. And the kafir are, they're like dogs, they were pigs, they're monkeys, they're not even really people. So you didn't really care. You could lie, you could deceive them, you could steal from them. Like you could. And there's no fitna or there's no sin. So you can do whatever you want and it doesn't matter because they're literally viewed as not even people. And that is something that the non-Muslim world is going to have to wake up to really quickly because it's not what you think it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, people just don't want to believe that, do they? I mean, people just don't want to believe that, like, that people can be like that. I mean, because it's just such a foreign experience to us to behave in that way. Everyone tells lies, and
yeah.
people are dishonest all the time. But this idea that you lie to protect this, because it's really, at the end of the day, it is a superiority complex, isn't it? I mean, it's a classic one where you are above everyone because you have this secret knowledge. Now, I know people will say that that's same as Christianity. They all purport to have revealed truths to them, but as far as I'm aware, there's no invocation in other religions to sort of say, and exhort the followers to say you can lie, you can do all these kinds of things.
Well, you're not subject to any law that is made by man. You are only subject to Islamic law because that comes from God himself. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say. No, I'm not even kidding you. You will be told in a mosque here in the United States that you can lie and cheat and even steal from kafir, and it doesn't matter. Like, what, who cares? They're not people. This is the same justification that was used for slavery and that Muslims in Islamic countries today still use as a justification for slavery. That's still in their heads. You're not a Muslim. You're not a person. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's again, I didn't mean to say before that the idea of lying is out of our experience or being dishonest, but the idea that the way you're instructed to do it and the justification you get in Islam, I don't think exists in anywhere else, in any other religion anyway.
Well, they tried to use it in the West during the high days of chattel slavery, but it obviously didn't go over well because it didn't last. No. It just wasn't going to work.
Yeah. So maybe that brings us, because we're now an hour and 25 minutes in, and I know you starting a stream later on. Yeah. So maybe if we could just finish up maybe with, so my line on this is how do you if the question of how do you attack sort of radicalization in Western countries. Muslims are here. There's mosques, as you say. The happy face that the mosque presents to the rest of the community is not the same face that happens inside the mosque. So how do you confront this? And is it, as the FBI, at least we're doing, to some extent, infiltrating mosques through informants, through people who go in and become Muslims nominally? Is this how you attack it? Because it seems it is a closed system, and as I said to you before we went on air, that quote from the Council of American Islamic Relations, that spokeswoman that came out in 2009 when they found out the FBI was going and getting informants in mosques and etc., was that mosques should be closed to non-believers and the Quran should be closed to non-believers. They actually said this because they don't want you to know what's going on in there. So what is the solution? I finally got to the question.
The first thing that I would suggest really to anybody is to compel your government to apply the law fairly and equally to everyone. Because, again, you come from this perspective where you're above the law because you're a Muslim, so la-di-da for you, and they will treat you like shit, and they will treat your government like shit, and they will take advantage of all of your programs because you and your society are nothing to them.
Yeah.
So if you compel them by force of law to abide the law of the land, that's going to be the first step. The second thing is going to be, don't be afraid to speak up against it. Don't be quiet. Don't shout it down. When you have, I saw a video somebody sent me of men in Australia wearing the niqab, going into banks, going into places, and they're getting in to these secure areas and they're showing women's IDs, because how the hell do you know? And they get attacked by these Muslim guys, and they're screaming and yelling at them and saying, you're insulting Islam, and you're going to go to hell, kafir, and take that off right now. And they're screaming at them. This is disrespectful. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to beat you to death. They're saying all this stuff, and the cops are standing there letting them say it. These cops need to nut up, and as soon as that dude says, I'm going to beat you, that's a threat of violence, arrest him, just like you would anybody else. Don't let them get away with shit just because they're Muslim. This wasn't a protest. These were guys trying to basically test the security of banks and government buildings in their province. And they're allowed to do that. I mean, even ISIS banned the burqa in their entry points and security centers because you can't know who's underneath of it.
Well, I'll tell you another fantastic example of this in Australia. Now, there was a woman who was wearing a full burqa pulled over by the cops because of a broken taillight, I think, or one of the lights wasn't working. Maybe it wasn't, something like that. So she gets pulled over. Now, the cop has one of those cameras on at the front of the car, so he's filming the whole thing. So the woman gets out and she starts abusing him and saying that he's racist, and this is why he's, Muslims, Islam is not a race. But anyway, it starts, racist, you just pulled me over because I'm a Muslim, blah, 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 blah.
That's what you ask them. They tell you you're racist, go,
yeah.
What race am I racist against?
I know,
put them on the
spot.
It's
a great one.
I hate that shit.
But anyway...
I hate a misuse of language anyway, but that one really bugs me.
It's annoying. But so this goes to court, and she wants to bring him up on charges of unfairly targeting Muslims or whatever,
harassment, whatever.
She doesn't know they don't know they've got the tape, right? And so then there was a counter claim to sue her for something, making misleading statements or wrong statements to the police or whatever, and it went to court. And you know what the defense they used was? The defense was that it was actually a different person because you can't be sure, right? Because the burqa covers... Right. So, I mean, if you want a better example of why that thing should be banned, especially in public places like banks or when you get your photo taken for a driver's license or something like that. I mean, that's it. They're going to turn around and use it to say, well, that wasn't me. And how can you prove it was? Because, you can't even see who it was.
Well, exactly. Well, like the guys, the men in burqas showed, they were showing other people's IDs, and they were getting in. They were getting into people's, getting into the back of banks and stuff, and because nobody wants to go, I need you to remove your face veil. Nobody wants to ask. Nobody wants to be the asshole. Be the
Yes,
asshole.
it's not
This is
being an
your
asshole.
country. These are your
Yeah.
laws. Apply. That's what I'm saying. Apply them fairly. Make them adhere to the law of the land. Because if you give an inch, they'll take a
Yeah.
mile.
Yeah. What?
Because they believe that they're above you. So
yeah, this is what's wrong with the liberal left. They just think that multiculturalism means we bend over backwards to accommodate your beliefs and your way of life. It's like, no, that's not what successful it boils down to this: you come to join us, not to change us, really. And I know that is devoid of a lot of nuance that can be unpacked there, but that's really it. It's about pluralism, not multiculturalism. Yes, you have to imbibe the values. And one of those values of our society is that when we interact with people on a face-to-face level, we want to see your face. This is part of our society. This is our values. This is the way we operate. And the burqa has no place in this. But maybe that's a whole other discussion that we can have at a different time.
Well, it's about protecting your society and your culture. This is your country. Stand up for it, protect it. Especially when you have, it's not just Islam infiltrating by mass immigration. You also have the left who are kowtowing to every stupid demand anybody makes, and very quickly, culture is dying. The Finnish language is dying.
Yeah,
because of massive immigration. It's killing Western society by being so.
Yeah. The radical left, some reason, has got it in its head, and this is the same here in Australia, that our society is deeply racist, sexist, every ist. They just get out their bigotry bingo card and read off all the entries. And they actually don't like their own culture. Whereas we come at it as, we actually kind of like where we come from, and our culture is actually pretty good. It's got pretty good principles, and if you look around the world where it's spread, they are the best places to live, and we'd like to kind of keep it that way. But just that will get you labelled racist, xenophobic, bigot, whatever other label they want to put on you, and that's a sad state of affairs. But that's where we are.
Yeah, it's coming to a head. You just have to make a stand.
Yeah.
And I think that if the government doesn't step up and say, okay, we've been as nice as we're prepared to be, you have X amount of time to assimilate, or you need to leave. They have to stand their ground. You have a lady there. I don't know her name. The redheaded lady.
Pauline Hanson. Yeah.
Pauline Hanson.
Yeah.
I love this lady. She said, I listened to her entire speech, the one that the asshole party
walked out
of. This is the virtue signaling international party.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What I'm calling them.
Yeah.
But she said nothing inflammatory. She gave the facts as they were presented. She had the information to substantiate her claims. She wasn't trying to be defamatory toward anyone. It's about cohesion, national cohesion. That needs to be the goal of every country, and building their society is cohesion. So when you have groups that make your society an outgroup, and everybody's bad and everybody's, evil or guilty of something, you're going to have a lot of fracturing, and you're going to have a splintered society, and it cannot sustain itself.
That's right.
It cannot survive, and it kills your country to do this to it. To have no moral values that are held by everyone, that are a baseline. Like in the U.S., it seems bad, but we've always called it the American way. It's actually a thing. It's a way of viewing ourselves. Yeah, maybe our country's not the greatest, but we do our best. We try to be fair, et cetera, et cetera. The people of the U.S. do not like policing the world. We're very against it. We hate what our government's doing. But they're just going to go do it anyway. So that's why we have people like Trump, because the people are rebelling against the government.
Yeah,
they're rebelling against the tyranny.
And Hanson is the product of those exact same forces that have produced Trump. Exactly. It's the exact same forces that have produced the Brexit vote, that they thought was going to go the other way but didn't. And
Well, precisely.
And politicians are still not listening by and large. But and Europe's even worse, how fractured that political system have come in various countries. But Pauline Hanson's problem in Australia is that while she is saying perfectly reasonable things, she is tainted by a past in which she said that before that we were. Now she's saying swamped by Muslims, which is, when you look at the statistics, no, we're not being swamped by Muslims, but the fear is well grounded. But she said the same thing about Asians 20 years ago, and she was wrong. And she was wrong, and so she's tainted forever with this past. So she's just having a go at another group. That's how a lot of Australians see it. But her concerns are very legitimate, and that's why that poll was so very interesting, because as I put in my video, that idiot party, that's the Green Party that walked out, one third of their own party agrees with what Pauline Hanson says. That's stunning.
Which is honestly pathetic that they would turn against their own constituency to such a degree as to not even take their concerns seriously enough.
Because it is what you said. It's complete virtue signaling. That's all it is. That's their entire platform, pretty much on everything, is to virtue signal.
Oh yeah, it's becoming more and more obvious that it's just who gets patted on the head the most. That's what I'm seeing. There's a lot of pandering to whatever's popular at the time, and the problem with pandering to what's popular at the time is that there is no foundation. You have no solid ground to stand on, and there is no unifying force. The people of a country will absolutely be united regardless of what the government wants to do. The people will always look out for themselves and their interests. That's why you're seeing bloody confrontations in Europe, in Sweden, in Finland, where these, quote, refugees are raping old ladies. Cops let them off because they can't do anything about it. So what happens?
Cultural sensitivity.
You're gonna run into a posse who's not gonna put up with that shit.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what's gonna happen.
And that's and there's a really good chance that will happen in the U.S. People are already buggy. People are already not trusting what's going on. They're watching really, really closely. And they're already saying, if the police aren't going to do anything, we will. We have an obligation as citizens to each other to protect each other. So if we have a threat and that threat is not being addressed by the assigned authorities, it's the duty of the citizenry to defend. And we have to. We defend our homes, we defend our neighborhoods, we defend our towns. This is our duty, and being an American means that that's what you do. I don't know about Australia, but I will say this: I seriously question the manhood of any leader who got up and walked out. You're just a giant vagina.
Oh yeah.
I have no respect for you.
Well, yeah.
You should have stayed and listened. You should have been aware of concerns, particularly when what you said, a third of their constituency has concerns about this.
It was
that's worth addressing.
See, the sequence of events was that walkout happened 1 week before that poll came out. So they didn't know, for example, that 1/3 of their constituents would have ponied up to support what basically Pauline Hanson's calling for, which is an end to Muslim immigration. So they weren't armed with that knowledge, but it just goes to show you how out of touch they are because they're so committed to the virtue signaling.
Yep. Well, it's the whole I want to have the shiniest apple. It's not going to help you because it doesn't help the people who are depending on you.
Well, and the other
to protect their interests.
The other important part of I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did anyway. Is that because while we're on the topic of Australia, that these guys, the Green Party, they live in areas of cities like Melbourne, like Sydney, where there is absolutely no Muslim immigration, and they rip on the areas of the country that does have to take the Muslims in and does have to deal with integration issues and lectures them about being racists and Islamophobes and xenophobes and all the rest of it, while sitting in their sort of gated communities where they're paid a lot of money to basically get away from that kind of thing. And that's the in hypocrisy, and a lot of Australians see straight through that. They really do.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's only so long that you can push this smoke and mirrors before people realize that it's just a trick, and they get tired of it. I mean, I I would have a lot more respect for our government if they just stood up and said, this is what it is, you know, and we have to deal with this situation. I think that's why people like Donald Trump so much, because he's just not going to back down from the reality of the situation, which is you cannot have a ton of people coming into a country from God only knows where and try to figure out some way to vet them. And then they talk about stuff like they want to, trim down the vetting process to 3 months from 18 months. I mean, if you have no way to track these people, you don't know where they're from. ISIS said they had 10,000 blank Syrian passports that they were going to use to infiltrate countries.
Yeah.
So you have that on it. And you can't read minds, so you have no way to vet these people.
Well, this is the ridiculous...
The worst thing you can do is have this huge immigration dump and then tell your citizenry, tough shit, get used to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said to you before we went on air, that Australia had committed to taking X amount of... It always fucking changes. I can't remember how many. But X amount of Syrian refugees in 2016. And we have been taking some, but there's no way we're going to meet that quota that we committed ourselves to. And it's because the vetting process is taking so long. And I think, well, great. I'm glad it's taking so long. I'm glad you're taking the time to try and find out these people's backgrounds. But of course, half the country here is going, oh, this is horrible. These poor people have been left in exile. It's like they don't seem to understand or don't seem to care, or because their cultural relativism just blinds them to that, vetting and taking a long time to vet people is actually a good thing. This is actually a good thing.
Yeah. And they're safe where they are. I mean, you've got to remember, if they can stay there for 3 months or 18 months, then they're cool where they are, and you need, to relax. It's good that, as people who are blessed in the world, that you want to help other people, but the worst thing you can do is put yourself in danger in a misguided attempt to harm other people, or to stop other people being harmed. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what time are you streaming? Just whenever you get off this.
About half an hour.
In about half an hour. All right. So I'll let you go, and I'll. I mean, I think I'm not going to touch this. I think this an hour and 40 or whatever we've gone is fine, and I'll probably try and upload
it because it was a lot of planes going over. So at least you'll be able to cut a lot of stuff out.
Yeah, I can tinker with that and see how it comes out. But before we go, do you want to just tell people where they can find you? You're both on YouTube and on Minds.
Oh, yep. I'm Based Mama on YouTube, and on Minds it's minds.com/based_mama.
Yep.
And you can follow me there.
All right. So, yep, go and subscribe to her. She's got some good stuff on there, even though she doesn't like the technical side of things. She puts up videos, interesting stuff. And thank you so much for coming on. There's probably a whole heap more to discuss on this topic, but it's probably limited by my knowledge at this point. But maybe we'll get you back on again and talk some more.
No problem. Anytime.
All righty. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks again.